Hi everyone, Mark Fior here. I'm with Lucas Dann, who's at his place in Amsterdam today. We're going to have a little bit of a longer chat today about musical things. Uh, Lucas, I first knew you when you were quite a bit younger than you are now. Oh, sorry, let me try that again. I just had a freezing problem on my end. I'll just start that again.
Yeah, my end too.
Okay, so we'll just restart. Hey everyone, it's Mark Fior here. I'm with Lucas Dann today, who's sitting in his apartment in Amsterdam, and we're just going to talk a little bit about music in general here in this extended conversation. You know, Lucas, I've known you since you were a young child, and I know that you grew up in an environment where you were surrounded by, of course, your mother and father, and they're huge influences in the music world, but also your siblings. And I've been thinking a lot at this point in my life about how much exposure, particularly early exposure, is such a driving force for people's lives. Do you have a sense of that when you look back to those times as a child, what that was like for you, and do you have particular memories about things that were formative for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think a big thing for me growing up in that family, a big something that really affects how I see the world, how I see music, and whatever is that we traveled a lot growing up, or I got to travel a lot, just by virtue of my dad performing everywhere, and so these kind of his tours turned into my holidays, or my, so that brought me all around the world, and I got to meet a lot of really incredible musicians, and it became actually kind of normal to hang out with these musicians who were so incredible. It wasn't such a shock, or it wasn't so I never, when I would meet someone who was really a special musician, I was never nervous around them. So it became a part of my life that I felt very comfortable with. Most of my parents' best friends are really, really great musicians.
Right.
And, so yeah, I think just being around these people was really formative for me. It was really important.
I
Yeah.
have, I have one memory. I can't remember how old you were. You may have been like 15 or 16 or something, and you were really starting to investigate the keys, the piano. And I was at your folks' place for dinner, and I had my violin with me, and so I took out my fiddle, and you sat at the keyboard, and we started to jam together a little bit. And I just remember the sense of joy that came out of your face once we started to play. There was just this like, wow. And
Yeah.
in some ways, you would almost think that if you're surrounded by music all of the time, that sometimes the sense of joy about doing it on a regular basis would be something that gets turned down. The volume on that would get turned down. But I never saw that with you. I kind of saw the opposite, which was over time, you just became more and more excited by music in general. Do you feel like that's still happening for you?
For sure. I mean, I can feel it, speeding up even more now. Now that I have a lot more control over my life, living over here and making musical decisions and playing with lots of new musicians, and I'm just getting more and more excited about what I'm doing. But for sure, I mean, moments like that where I got to play with you, or whatever friends were over of my parents, or guest musicians of the Toronto Symphony who my mom would have over for dinner, and you know yeah, that's so exciting, playing with people who are way better than you, way more experienced than you are. It's the dream. It's all you want, is to play with people who can teach you something, uh, and be able to take something out of that experience. But that's not to say that when I was a kid, I was always very happy to sit down and practice piano, and I had lots of other things that I was distracted by, or
When did that,
uh,
when did that change?
but yeah.
When did that change?
When did I stop being distracted? Oh, I'm still very distracted. I think, it's, you know, I've always had kind of side things that I'm really curious about. And, but yeah, starting to take it really seriously in that way, I don't know, maybe like early teens. I started playing classical music when I was really a little kid, and uh, switching to jazz for me, or switching is the wrong word, adding jazz to that. At some point, I really did kind of make this switch, but that's when I was about 12 or so. I think that's when it became really my decision, my path, my yeah, my mission, let's say, for me.
Right. And so, there's a way in which I think my family, my siblings, they all carry the talent. They all carry the genes, as it were, for the musical gift. And I'm the only one that decided to kind of go ahead with it as a career for my life. But I have to believe that they all possess it. And I've seen it when we were younger, particularly. I saw it firsthand, whether they were playing whatever instrument, or they were playing with a group, or maybe somebody sang a solo or whatever. They all had it. And looking back a generation to my father was a great singer, but also a great storyteller. And I sometimes think to experiences now with my family when we're together, my siblings can still tell a great story, even though they may not have an instrument in their hand. And so I wonder, for you, when you're playing music, particularly if you're improvising, is there a side of it for you that becomes about telling a story through music, or is it kind of a combination of that and being more abstract in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. For me, it really changes depending on who I'm playing with, where I'm playing, what the situation is. Depends on the type of music. This record that I just made with my trio, some of the music I wrote is very, you could say, story driven, or melody driven, you might say, in a more literal sense. But for instance, the title track of the record is called Serious Music, and it's basically a series of chords. It's not particularly interesting rhythmically and whatever. So for me, in that case, it's more about the improvising. It's about making something out of nothing, or not nothing, but so there are both things. Actually, I think that's true with a lot of musicians. What you were saying about your father being a great storyteller, I think musicians are incredible storytellers. I know my dad is a really great storyteller. I know you are too, and I think it's a thing that we need. We need to tell tales. We need to sing songs. We need to share all the time.
I think that's the way we kind of make sense of our world, is to try and turn it into something. The brain does it naturally without us even consciously necessarily being aware of it. It is trying to understand its environment through some kind of adjustment phase. And the adjustment phase kind of comes out sometimes as storyline, sometimes just as feel. And at this point in my life, I'm really interested in the difference between what we would put into word and then what occurs before and deeper than word. Because there's a way in which we now live in this, as people are referring to it, post-truth world, the fake news world, etc. If that's all going to be the future, then I feel like there's got to be a way to be able to communicate truth without having to speak a word, because the word itself means nothing except the content and intent behind it.
Sure.
And so all of that, I mean, it's in some ways related to, I had this experience when I was younger. When I lived in Vancouver, I had to learn how to recite some Shakespeare. So I had a teacher out there, a really cool guy named Dean Paul Gibson. Big shout out to him. He's an amazing guy. And I would go have acting lessons with him. And after the lesson was over, I would leave his place and I'd feel like, man, I could take on the world. And I'd have this feeling of, I love everything about the world and my place in it. And that would last for about 3 days. And then I'd call him up, I need another lesson desperately, right? And what he really taught me over all that time was that the words that I'm trying to understand from Shakespearean text, in this case, the words meant nothing. What was important was the emotional standpoint from which I delivered the words.
For sure.
So in music, it's equally that way. And if there's no words, there's a way in which that communication is probably with a sense of truth, I think, that is of increasing value as we live in this post-truth world. Do you find that level of communication with your friends when you're playing music, that is something that when you tap into that stream, it's a type of joy that you can't explain, and even to talk about it in words makes
Yeah, last night we played in this club in Frankfurt called Mumpf, and it's this really, really small, very cozy club, and the audience is really right in your face, and and it has this atmosphere where the energy is just amazing, and we had so many amazing moments, and we, it's funny because it was the last gig of this tour, and we're kind of a little bit looking forward to it, but it's also the last two clubs we played in were like halls and really nice. And,
Right.
but no, that, I mean, that magic kind of appears. And I think also to get back to what you said before, um, in improvised music, there's honesty, and there's also dishonesty in improvised music. There's a lot of, you know, faking it, and you know, there's a lot of jazz musicians, you hear them talking about you play what you hear.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, you hear them play and you think there's no way you hear that. That's not there. It's not in your ears. It sounds dishonest.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not words that really say factually that is dishonest, but it's a big part of improvised music is playing stuff that you can stand behind, and a lot of the time that just means playing melodies that are singable, or if you are going to go into a musical tangent and play something really virtuosic and really intense and dissonant and complicated, it has to be from a place where it has to be from an emotional place that you can stand behind, that you can actually argue for.
Right. So it's exactly the same thing as kind of that lesson I had with the acting teacher in Vancouver, and I think that's something that, you know, when audiences come to listen to music, if they don't know the person that they're sitting down to listen to, in other words, if they're not there because, oh, it's so and so, and they're a big star, and I know that by going there it'll be great or whatever. If they don't know the person, then sometimes I feel like we're in an environment now where finding a way for the public to feel comfortable listening and to then actually get something of real value that they take with them, so they feel enriched by the experience through music alone, music without the that's something I think, you know, that's something only honest musicians can offer. You know, honest musicians offer the opportunity for that enrichment at a very simple but very natural and particularly, I think, a rewarding experience for people who are in the room at the same time. And for me, that can happen in something like that night we were jamming at your folks' place, or it can happen on stage at, you know, Wigmore Hall or Carnegie or whatever. The space doesn't really matter. What matters is the integrity behind the message, and that's it's interesting to hear you use that word, or use the words in describing improv as being, you know, honest or dishonest, because I do that in classical music all the time, and
Of course.
as a concept, that's something we don't talk about that often. But when I would, you know, say to a student, you know, that sounds good, but I don't believe you, they're shocked. They just, what are you talking about? I'm playing.
I mean, I learned that before I learned the honesty in improvised music, because I would be with my dad in a lesson. He would be teaching someone, or I'd see him give a master class, and he used that all the time, and I didn't necessarily understand it, initially, but over time it really made sense to me. And then when I went into the improvised world, especially in the beginning when I was very self-conscious, and, you know, technically I could play piano quite well, but it's like all of a sudden someone just takes the sheet music off your ledger and just says, yeah, good luck, you know, do it, you play anything. Wow. But so it took me a while to really get into that headspace of, I need to play something really true, really real. And you hear that, and I guess in some ways in classical music that's harder to define, or you really need to be someone who has an ear to hear that, but I think any audience member will know, you know, they'll hear the difference. Even if they like one thing, if you hear someone who's really playing from deep down, playing music that's really a part of them, you'll hear it. It'll affect you.
Yeah. I like the phrase that a friend of mine coined a few years back, which is stemming from this idea that if you go into the world of improvisation and go into it deeply enough as a classical player, then when you come back to looking at works of Schubert or Tchaikovsky or Mozart, whichever composer, you're looking at it from a different set of variables.
Mm.
And you can see sometimes exactly what a composer was thinking when they decided they were going to make these choices on the page. And then when you can get to that point, if you can, and it's still, I'll just add that, you know, even if I find myself looking at a Mozart piece and saying, whoa, that's incredible, I have to temper that with humility, which is like, I'm still the servant to the piece. Even though now I feel like I understand it on a deeper level than I did before, I'm still its servant.
Yeah.
But the phrase my friend coined a few years back, when you look at it from that perspective, then you see the honesty in the pen from the, and the phrase he coined was honesty as fuel. And I like that phrase a lot in terms of just maintaining integrity in the musical world. Honesty as fuel is it. That's really
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's perfect. That's really nice, actually. I'm going to use that now. But when I'm composing, when I'm writing music, I have most of the songs that I've written really in one sitting. You know, I have the beginning of an idea, or you know, sometimes I'll have a whole idea, or sometimes I'll have very little. But I sit down and I start writing, and then it's done. Usually sometimes in half an hour, sometimes in 3 hours, but usually it's one sitting. And I find that a lot of the music that I start to write, if I'm searching for something, if I go, I don't really know how this is going to sound, so I just put something there that I know is correct, or, you know, and I never finish it. I just tear it up and I throw it away because it's not honest. It's not real. So all the music that I think all the music that I wrote on this new record, and actually every song I've written since this record, has been one sitting composition. Maybe two, but mostly one.
You're a regular old Mozart, sitting down and getting it done in the one-time special, the one-timer. Hey, what a pleasure to
yeah,
chat.
except
What a pleasure to chat today, and I will look forward to seeing you in a few weeks here in Stratford. And have a great trip to Dublin. Drink a few Guinness for me, and
I will.
I'm sure you will. Yeah, and we'll have to hoist something when you're here too. But all the best for your continued success, eh?
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited, and I know Harmen is too. We're really looking forward to being there.
Great. Okay, we'll see you very shortly. Take care.
Okay, see you soon.